We'll try that again. Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdicus Dave, and today I've got Rick Heinz with me, author and writer for Geek and Sundry, and you've done some other things too, I believe. But I'll let you tell people about that. How you doing today, sir?
Hello. I'm doing fantastic. I have coffee, I have metal music, and my life is rather awesome out here in Chicago. So I'm Rick Hines. I did a lot of stuff with GM Tips and Geek and Sundry. I also work with Satine Phoenix over at the Gilding Light. But mainly, uh, the reason I'm here is because of the Red Opera Last Days of the Warlock. That is my new book that we're coming out with. So um, I'm here to talk about that.
Nice. What is that? That sounds exciting. I've read I've read the series from you, or at least the first book. I don't know if there's any
My
more
sequel's
books.
coming out. I actually got a publishing contract for the next 3 books. So those are indeed coming out.
The Seventh Age series, and as always, you can find this stuff down in the description. And it was really good. It was a very different take on, I want to say, both superheroes and vampires. I won't say anything more because I don't want to spoil anything. But it was definitely a fun read, and I would recommend people check it out.
Oh yeah. Sarcastic urban fantasy about the end of the world. It's kind of timely and relevant at the moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the Red Opera is what happened is the band members from Cradle of Filth, Black Crown Initiate, and a few other people in Chicago. I'm an electrician by day, right? So I do some concert lighting and shows and stuff by night. So I have become friends with a lot of bands, and they were over, and this was about 2 years ago, and they were talking about, they had this plan to release this album with Diamorte called the Red Opera, and it was a full metal symphonic opera that was like an hour and a half long, track, very Coheed and Cambrian, like this whole idea of a whole saga tied into a campaign. And they were like, great, now how do we get this out and how do we show people what the hell this thing is? And I was just sitting there in the back sipping. Okay, it wasn't coffee at that time. I'm pretty sure it was a brand of whiskey. But I was sitting there and I was like, hey, guys, why don't you turn this into a D&D campaign? And they were like, what do you mean? And I'm like, listen, everybody I know who plays or who loves metal also plays some kind of game. And you have all of this crazy music. You already have a saga. All I have to do is revise your lore and get down and start writing. And they were like, okay, well, have at it. And I thought I was going to put together a little 20,000 word, campaign adventure that the band was going to sell it for merch. And once I got writing, I ended up rewriting the entire opera. I got the band to change their stage show. We built everything from the ground up. And now I have this 95,000 word campaign module. And the idea is every act in this is actually tied to a musical scoring symphony from the Budapest Scoring Symphonic Orchestra that you can like actually play, while you're running the campaign. But the storyline is the idea that you're set in this Shadelands, a place where the veil between worlds runs thin. And you, as the players, come here on a pilgrimage, no matter what class you are. And the accursed king, who's a warlock who runs this city, is starting to lose his sanity. And you, as players, determine what actually happens into this Shadelands over this tragedy that is the campaign storyline. That's like multiple choice, different endings, very narrative and story driven towards the characters.
So, I thought it was cool before, but now after listening to you explain it and the origins, it just got a lot cooler. So, is this a campaign setting?
It's a campaign setting, but it's more of an adventure, I should say. I'd say it's both, right? What we've done is I've written a single city. This way you could drop it into your campaign setting. Like I could run this in Eberron, Ravnica. I could run it in Forgotten Realms. It doesn't really matter what game I'm running. All I need is the ability to take a city to the north and say, this is the Shadelands, right? But in that city, the city of the Shadelands and the territory surrounding it, that's a whole setting. There's going to be some playable warlock classes. There's going to be stuff for players in there, some extra species. a few different like patron packs and ideas because we want everybody to feel what it's like to be a warlock. In the campaign, anybody, no matter what class you are, can cut deals with patrons and get temporary boons and powers because we really wanted to play up. Hey, 5th edition has this class with warlocks, but not everybody really gets to play with that warlock patron relationship. And if you are lucky enough to be playing a warlock, you as a storyteller don't want to exclude the other 4 players at the table who aren't playing a warlock. So we've got it set that all the players, no matter their class, get to sort of feel that back and forth and tug and soul with warlock patrons and their machinations for good or evil.
So I'm gonna add the trailer to the description so folks can check that out if they like. Also because it was a really great Kickstarter trailer, one of the best I've seen, to be honest with you. And it kind of sucks you in. It's pretty cool. So in a moment that'll be in the description for people to check out if they like. And also once this thing goes from live, we'll have all that stuff in the pinned comment as usual. I just think it's really cool that the inspiration is a metal band. And I remember, like, my friend group growing up, we were all headbangers. I mean, I guess that was our clique. And we were also gamers, but we, at that, back in the 80s, you didn't talk about gaming. It was like Fight Club, right? And so we would call gaming rocking out. It was like our code word for, are we going to game this weekend? So the muggles wouldn't know what we were talking about.
No, I mean, I remember, first off, very heavily Satanic Panic back in when Bad was around, that bothered against Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know if you remember that whole campaign series where they were giving out pamphlets that, like, if you play Dungeons and Dragons, you are going to go to hell. If you listen to Ozzy Osbourne, you are going to go to hell. And that being around in the late 80s or early 80s, late 80s and early 90s when I was a kid, I had some of those. I remember being with my mom and a police officer noticing that I had an AD&D book and was like, are you aware that your child is being influenced by the devil? And this stuff happened, but this metal music and gaming have always had like ties to each other and influences back. What was really cool was when we found when the band turned this into an instrumental symphonic bit, they found that their music ported over wonderfully to go from like the crazy, because you can, in the Kickstarter, we're going to have the original band's album with all the lyrics and the crazy metal and the high end stuff. But inside the book and the QR codes where you scan them, you just get the instrumental symphonic tracks. And turning metal into symphony, the band found out that it went really, really well. And I'm not a musician, so I don't know. Like, they were just freaking out over like the technical aspects of how well that worked. And I was like, you guys are speaking a foreign language to me, but it sounds cool.
I'm not a musician either. A bunch of my friends were growing up. And my understanding though is metal, especially like speed metal and thrash and all that stuff, while most people wouldn't appreciate it, like actual musicians see like how technical it is. Supposedly it's very, very technical compared to other forms of music. When you have the instrumentals, everyone else just hears someone screaming into the microphone, which is an acquired taste.
I always hear the drums. That's always what got me. But yeah, they that part went well. The story that was going to go with this, we got a chance to fully overhaul it, and the band liked the new lore that I had written for them, so they were 100% down for revising their stage show. And the project went from this little tiny thing all the way into this huge, huge aspect where we all kind of fell in love with the setting of the Shadelands and the story that was there, and even the very operatic, tragedies that can happen, at the end.
Yeah, it's such a cool premise. Have you ever heard of The Anchor?
I have not.
So it's another metal band. The lead singer is this woman, Lindsay Ray. I believe her day job, she was a teacher. I don't know if she still is, but she's like this tiny thing with this most guttural scream and singing voice you'll ever hear. I actually don't really care for the band as much as I'm a fan of her stuff, and she's got a YouTube channel where she'll redo like some pop culture stuff, or she'll do recipes and like weird stuff, which is super entertaining. But I'm just like amazed and mystified to see this tiny person belt out these sounds. I was like, wow. I bet she's got her classroom reined in for sure. When she uses
right.
the demon voice to scream at you.
That's I pulled her up, by the way, so I'll check her out after this. But the in the Red Opera, there's two singers, and they are as well very, very tiny, and their opera on stage presence of how well they are able to just sing almost in full opera all the way to the back of the crowd. I'm like, how is this like Bard superpowers? Like, how do you do this?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, so that's what we've been working on, right? We already finished the full story. We've got everything already written, laid out, built up this entire world. We partnered up. We did some things that we're really excited for. We got the Heavy Metal Hall of Fame to come back us and help out. So they're letting us, have some extra band influence to really make it pop. We partnered with the guys from Initiative Coffee to make like a Red Opera coffee, because like I was like, come on, metal and coffee, we got to do this. But
now you just need a whiskey brand.
Oh my god, I wish I could get a mead.
Or some kind of other booze. Yeah,
I want a good mead to go with this. But once people have, like, I know art and flashy graphics and things like that are really a core, because that's what sells a product. When you first look at it, you see the beautiful artwork that's there and how it's laid out. But since we've had it all written, we're able to share the like full draft with some people. We've gotten people come back afterwards and be like, okay, these endings are holy crap, right? Like, when they really liked it, that it's not a narrative campaign that you sit there and you start off and you play and you go, this is your story, and you run people straight through. Your players actually get agency to affect and change the Shadelands. And that was the hardest thing for the band to understand and bite off on, was that when I was like, hey, you want to have this as a campaign, that's cool, but campaigns rely on players making choices that will completely throw all of your expectations off the table. Like, you have no idea if the players are going to go decide to join up with the bad guy and be like, we're going to be tyrants in the Shadelands and set up our own kingdom. You can do that. That is a thing. But incorporating multiple choice into the band's official lore, that was a tricky narrative experience to write for, because when you don't know what players are going to do, you still have to accommodate for them to be able to do everything. And like most storytellers, when you're at the table doing an improv session, it's no big deal. You can sit there and be like, read the room, figure out what your player's going to do, go to the bathroom, eat an apple, and then think of evil villain schemes to go next after that. But how do you write that? Right? Like, how do you distill that into a playable campaign for another storyteller to run, or other players to read it and then not have the ending spoiled for them because they've read it, they've looked at the warlock classes, they've figured out these new features that they want? Because you know how it is as a storyteller when players buy the campaign books and they flip through and they read stuff and they're like, aha, I know how this is going to end, and there's no point in playing the game.
Yeah.
But that's not true. You can have your campaigns end in these crazy ways where it's like, listen, here's the theme of an opera. And when you get to this point as a storyteller, we give you some guidance on here's how you should end the campaign. We have some set endings for you if your players have fallen and made these choices. But if they didn't, here's the themes of the Red Opera. And you can craft an ending using these themes based on what your players have done as well. So that's something that I'm really, really proud of, because even when the band is going to do their live performances, which they were going to play at Gen Con this year, but obviously Gen Con got canceled. But even the live performances, have now been changed and altered to allow fan interaction at critical moments of the stage show. And like they have like 2 or 3 different endings because they can't have as many, but they can have a few on their stage show. But that was the biggest, I think, change from the beginning of this whole project to where things turned up to at the end.
So, the Red Opera, are they gamers? Doesn't sound like it.
Some of the band members are James Dorton. He's a huge gamer. He's from Black Crown Initiate. He was part of the Hell Choir in Doom Eternal. He has done some voiceover work for Elder Scrolls Oblivion. He himself is this like, I mean, he's the epitome of metal gamers, like long dreadlocks, ripped dude, and he's like gonna sit on down and be like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna play a bard. Let's go. I'm gonna be the nice guy at the table. And the lead singer, or the band's like main producer now, Drake Mephisto, he's so into this, and he's such a big gamer that he wanted to like get in and write flavor text for some of like the items and some of the places in there. And he's so big into it that he's like now commissioning himself armor so he can like cosplay as his character and stuff like that, which his character isn't like in the book, but he's a hardcore gamer. The other band members, some of them play games to varying degrees. Maybe they've sat at a table once or twice. It's usually the guys from the Heavy Metal Hall of Fame. I did have to explain to them what role playing was, because when they were talking to me, they were like, okay, so is this like Monopoly? Right? Because they didn't quite understand what the band was doing when we were fusing gaming and metal to this level, right? And I had to explain to them and Dark Star Records, I was like, this is what it is. And sometimes you find somebody who's on the other side of that table who's like, oh yeah, I play, right? I'm back in the day, I get this entirely. Other times I was like, no, okay, let's walk you through a session. This is what you do. But
so have you gotten any converts?
yes, I have. I think I can't say who I'm going to be running for yet, but I think there's been some people from the Heavy Metal Hall of Fame that they want to play a one-shot session for. And if some of these people sign off, it's going to be awesome, because the symphony of destruction that will be heard is pretty epic.
Yeah. So nice. This is a super cool project. I'm glad you reached out to us about it. Kind of moving on a little bit, during the apocalypse, how's your gaming been going? More or less or the same?
It's different. So right now, I had been running before the apocalypse this D&D for Kids program at this local game store, Fair Games, and the whole point was to teach kids how to be storytellers. That's actually my next project after this, is taking a whole book of teaching people how to become storytellers. And when this happened, we all had to switch to Zoom to run games. And it's very different when you're running for kids in, getting them to sit at home, like log in, play Zoom and whatnot. But it's still been working. It's really helped the game store out. So that part has been pretty consistent. I've lost some players. Not every kid comes to the table where they want to sit and play via Zoom. I've started using Roll20 myself. I finally, for the first time, Dave, for the first time in years, have actually sat down to play a game. I haven't played in ages. I am always the storyteller. So I had a friend who finally decided to run a Legend of the Five Rings campaign, and I get to play every other Saturday night on Roll20. And it's the first time in about 2 years that somebody's actually run a game for me that I get to play in. And
I'm kind of surprised. A lot of people, I would figure, you know somebody running games.
Oh, I know people who are always running games, but the problem is that there are always those like, oh, we're going to run a game on Friday night, or we're going to run a game on this night. And I'm either already storytelling a game or I just can't game, 3 or 4 nights a week and then still produce content and then still be a dad and then still get all my writing done. So my gaming window had gotten very, very, very narrow for a long time.
Is that an RPG squeeze?
This is an RPG squeeze.
I see the Igor. Yeah.
Yep. Actually, yeah, I just had a conversation with them, and God, like a week ago.
Yeah,
Their
Brian.
sculptures. Yeah, Brian Collins. I just wrote up a whole article about them and their sculptures and stuff that they do.
Oh,
So,
nice.
yes, I love this RPG squeeze guy.
I seen it. I seen it in your head. I'm like, I know that thing.
But yeah, so that's it's awesome. It's like the best stress ball ever for your
Yeah.
desk. I was like,
And who doesn't want to crush a beholder?
dude, I love it because it's like you can finally throw
I mean,
beholders
Igor.
at your
An
players.
Igor.
Yeah, yeah. You can actually throw these at your players now, which is
Yeah.
awesome. So, but yeah, my gaming has changed. I've actually gotten to play a game. Storytelling has been the same. I'm lucky in the sense that I tend to run very narrative and plot heavy and politics heavy kind of games anyway.
Uh-huh.
So it doesn't matter that we're on Discord or Zoom or Roll20 or whatever we're using. That still comes across. The only thing I really miss is that, hey, we all get together, we have food, we have drinks, we can play until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. Like when we game, we tend to go very hard out here. So I do miss that.
Yeah. Well, no commute now. That's good for people.
That is.
What are some insights you've garnered from running for kids and gaming with kids?
So the first thing is that kids will allow you to improv endlessly. They will not complain. They will not bicker with you on the rules. They will not do this. But kids they always want, out of the 200 kids we have in the program, a lot of times the tables are filled with a bunch of murder hobos who just want to kill everything and level up. Or they're on the opposite end of the spectrum where they want to befriend every monster, recruit it, and like have this like army that they have gone around. It's like watching Undertale actually play out on whether or not they're choosing the genocide route or the pacifist route. I've also learned that, don't do any of the sort of patronizing, talk down and like, here's these D&D for kids, like actual like books that have the cute art and things like that. Those are for like really, really, really young kids. When you're running from ages like 8, and up, no, just throw the book at them, make them walk them through how to level up their character. They will take that book home. They will read all of the spells and then they will come back with crazy ideas.
Yeah.
And
kids like to steal things in games a lot.
Oh, yes, always. But they will come back with crazy ideas, and when you give them that freedom to do so, you as a storyteller do not have to plan your game session. You can really just sit back and let the kids drive where they go in the world. It's actually almost better to do it that way because they are more invested. Whereas if you're trying to force a story upon them, they may not be as hooked into that story because their mind is wandering around what they've latched onto. So it is much more of I'm going to be a backseat ST. Like last game session for me, this is what happened in the world. The players had killed Orcus. Orcus went to the underworld and got in line in Purgator, and Kelemvor was sitting there. Kelemvor hates Orcus because, god of undeath, god of death. And Kelemvor was like, screw it, I'm out, I'm going to leave. And because the players had killed Orcus, not once, not twice, but thrice, like they were after Orcus. They really wanted Orcus down. And so Kelemvor left, which meant nobody in the world could die. And this was the funny storyline that they were running with. You could get stabbed a whole lot. You'd still feel all the pain. Your arm would still be mangled, but you would never die. And we had been running with this for about 6 months in the campaign world. And we finally got to a spot where we had finished a quest. And I asked the players, okay, what are you guys going to want to do next? And the Hannah, Iris, Perry, and Charlie all sat there, looked at me very seriously, and were like, we're going to go give the Lord of Death a stern talking to. And I was like, what? And then they had a 2.5 game session a mini adventure where they went to Hal Rua to find where the god of death was hiding out and like challenge him to a cooking contest in order to get him to go back to the lands of dead and let people die again. And I didn't have to do any coming up. They were like, they found ingredients, they found like how they were going to challenge him to a duel. They figured they were going to do a cooking duel. They figured out what they were going to say. They did all of their research, and they spent at least one full game session arguing over whether or not it was a good idea to bring death back into the world. And so they role played it in character, and to see how far they've come along when they first sat down a year and a half ago, these kids never talked in character. They never did character art. They didn't, really understand what they were doing. Here was your initial sheet, to the point where now they are having theme songs, being invested in character backstory, story, getting involved in their own lore in the campaign world, coming up with how they're going to take initiative and do things really shows amazing player growth and potential.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a cool thing to see, and how different people, especially kids that interact with RPGs. I've got a nephew that's like super quiet until he starts playing D&D, and then like he's talking in voice, and with a voice and character and doing accents, and is all over the place making things up and kind of won't shut up, from the kid that normally just sits there and never says a word. It's such a great thing to see. Brian has a question for you. I'm planning writing a 3-shot and struggling to decide if I should write out pre-gens or have a limited set of character creation choices. Thoughts on writing for short arcs and one-shots?
So with one-shots, I very much like having pre-gens. But you do it in a weird way. You create half the character, and then you give the person a list of like questionnaires to pick out like a few customizable things, right? So you build most of the character because you don't have the time during a one-shot to really sit there. It's like the Dread system, right? With the Jenga tower. You have, when you build your character for Dread, you just ask 10 questions. What are you afraid of? What you stole something when you were 12. What did you steal? Right? Just general, very not generic questions, nothing lame like what makes you happy, actual fun stuff. Like make your questions wicked cool. Like you were involved in a duel to the death when a year ago. What did you do? Right? Get really cool questions and make those a part of your character creation to your pre-gen. And if somebody comes up with something awesome, give them a free feat or something like that. Now, as for a 3-arc adventure, you can have a lot of fun with 3 set plot beats, because you get your rising tension, your middle, and then your climax and your resolution. And you can do a really cool thing with those. I love them so much because you can take this little short story, you can run it, and then you have the characters in the epilogue of that leave and go throughout the world. And then if you ever run another one, you just tie it based off the outcome that these guys had done, and you can start daisy chaining short stories to build a whole lore. So for that one, you can have pre-generated characters if it's your first, but if it's a success, you're going to find that everyone that goes by, as you bring new players in, you're going to have an established world, and people will come to you with these characters and be like, I want to play this. That can really take off very well in a gaming group. So you can start with pre-gens, but the 3-arc ones have potential to grow into more.
True enough. I mean, especially if you build in level progression or whatever, they'll get some choices along the way, and the characters will change.
I mean, and also it's for 1-shots and 3-shots. The power level doesn't really matter as much. If you want to toss them a feat because they came up with some awesome backstory answer to questions, have at it. Like, let people customize their characters more for that, because you can easily adjust your encounters on the fly for a 1-shot. Like, oh, there's smoke in this thing. Cool. I'm just gonna, add a few extra bad guys that come in as reinforcements, or the terrain changes on them. So you can adjust on your back end for a 1-shot so fast. Let the characters just have as much customization as they want.
So, what kind of games are you running currently?
So the games I'm running currently, besides the D&D for Kids one, I'm running I'm playing in the Legend of the Five Rings. I'm running a Technocrat Vampire the Masquerade game. Uh, so the idea is this: you're a bunch of in the World of Darkness setting, you're a bunch of Men in Black agents, and your job is to put the genie back in the bottle and cover up any masquerade breaches that have happened. So I have a group of players, and they're called Division 7, and I take the worst horror stories that people send me from like, oh my God, in my game, this happened. Because I've got years of people complaining about their games to me. And so I have a list of all of the worst things that have happened in people's games, and I make these players go to that city and fix it. So like every week they get a mission, and it's like, well, the Bruja chucked the prince out of the Sears Tower, and he used celerity to run up the building. You have to go find a way to cover that up. And so that's one game I'm running, and then I'm also running pretty often right now is one of our stretch goals for the Red Opera is this one-shot adventure called Killing Time. And the concept of this is you all make level 1 characters from druids, paladins, everything of the sort, except you take warlock class features because your patron, you started off your life as a paladin, you started off as a druid, but a patron who was very diabolical basically roped you into a bad deal, and you are now a level 1 warlock. And the goal of this adventure is to go to the Shadelands and find somebody who can break that pact for you so you could go back to being a paladin. You've had your class stripped from you. And so I'm running a lot of that one right now because, we're gearing up for the Kickstarter. But that adventure hook we found for this one-shot campaigns has been like wildly successful. The idea that like my patron is a total jerk, and I wanted to be a paladin. I spent my life being a paladin, and now I'm a warlock. And you're like a warlock in like full plate mail armor with all the paladin equipment, and you're like, crap, I can't use any of this. But you have to go through the adventure with those hurdles.
Yeah.
To get yourself free. And so that's another one that I'm running. I haven't run the Division 7, the D&D for Kids, and the one-shots. The last campaign I had that came to an end, I think that was just before COVID blew up, though, I was running a Ravnica D&D campaign where we were up in... I had it set that Ravnica was above Faerun, and like they had some intermingling between them. And we were playing with the idea that the spokesperson of Ravnica had gone missing, and all the guilds were in like a competition for each other to become the next. And they're trying to solve the implicit maze in the basement. So it was like a tournament L5R inspired D&D campaign with a lot of like heavy like gods and politics and things going around. And that was really fun, but COVID killed it. That was a game that got shelved when everybody had to stay home. It's not a game that I could run via Zoom because basically we need the whiteboards. We need the late nights. We need the drinking. We need the one-on-one role-playing scenes that are, very weighty. So we need to be in person for that one. And we know it. So that one got put on pause for me, which is going to make it really hard to go back and pick up after who knows how long until we're able to do it again.
Well, that kind of leads to something we were talking about before we went live, and how games kind of get shelved after about 10 sessions.
Yeah, it's the 10 session rule, right? So out of all the panels that I've done throughout conventions, and every time I invite or host or talk to another storyteller, I usually ask people in the audience, hey, what's the longest session? You'll find people like, oh, I've had a campaign for a year, and I had this stuff. But when you really get down to it, you have that one game that's run for a year, but your average campaign lasts for 10 weeks. And when you think about it, you have one group that was probably held steady. But how many games have you started up that have lasted one session? or how many games have you started up that lasted 2 or 3, or adults just can't
Yeah.
coordinate together. And long-term campaigns are rare. So if you're lucky enough to have them, cherish them.
Yeah, I mean, I even find with our group when we were really consistent and played a lot that the campaigns were still short. The group, lasted. It wasn't like the group was dissolving. It's just like whoever was GMing didn't want to GM anymore, so someone else would take over, and we're like, we'll go back to that game. But by the time you're ready to go back to that game, that GM had a new idea for a campaign. So we would get a lot of that, or like you said, like the configuration would change a little bit, but just enough for us to be like, all right, let's do something different now. And then we wouldn't go back. Like my buddy Mark would joke, to play a high level character. If you wanted to play a 15th level character, we had to start at 13. So that seems about right.
I mean, one of the campaigns that I actually want to run, and I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I want to run a game where everybody is level 20, but I want it to be a full campaign, not just a one-shot campaign where we start up and like, no, there's no character progression. You've done your story arc. You are all level 20. And now here's your full campaign. You're never going to level up throughout the game. The only way your character is going to progress or gain advancements is by boons or heroic deeds or things that you achieve in the world setting. And I think we got as far as making characters, and I don't think we ever made it past that.
Sounds about right. There's so many games like that. What is it? 2C Gaming. They have an epic level.
They do. I'm actually in talks with 2C Gaming to have them like actually take a look at the Red Opera in terms of like going through all of the encounters to see how they could be, spiced up as well.
They're good guys over there.
Yeah. So that's another. Yeah, Igor and 2C Gaming. There we go.
There's probably more. It's a small industry.
It is. So what about you? What are you playing these days?
So we are playing. Let's see. We got an Expanse game going on that we're playing. We've got a couple D&D games I've got going on. So I've got one I'm running, one I'm playing in, and then I have what's like kind of like my family game, which is like my wife, my son, my nephew, and one of my son's friends. So what we did to kind of like break up the 10 session curse was when 5e came out, we just had like, I think the player's handbook at the time. We started 2 groups. Ted would run a game, I would run a game, and we do it once a month. And then soon after that, we brought in a 3rd dungeon master to run. Sometimes they would run D&D, but mostly they'd run other games, and they'd be like short arcs, and then we would switch that up. And it was essentially like 3 different groups that me and Ted were playing in. So, that actually allowed those campaigns to go on for 5+ years, essentially, since 5e has started. In some iteration, like the one group still exists, and we still play once a month. So that was the thing that seemed to work for us, because I think for us the biggest thing was just like GM burnout.
I mean, I'm definitely cursed to always be the storyteller here. The longest game that I ever ran was a 10-year-long Legend of the Five Rings game.
Oh wow, that's pretty epic.
That was the longest one that we ran. But to be fair, it's 10 years, but all of the players changed out from the beginning to the end, right? There were multiple starts and stops, right? The game would go for a bit, then it would stop, and then we'd restart it, but in the same world. We did a lot of that. I tend to have like the world sandboxes because I'm like, every bit of writing that you do is never goes to waste. So I will often go back and rehash and reuse old materials. But it did mean that L5R game basically was stitched together forcibly by my own hand until there was a freaking end. So
this will end somehow. No, I can definitely see that. Like in my early 20s, the kind of like the group that would be like Nerdarchy was kind of formed out of was solid for like 5 years. Like every Saturday night we gamed, and like calling out from gaming was like calling out from work, but your boss was a complete a-hole. Like so much so we had one player that would have his girlfriend call us to let us know he wasn't coming, which did not help his cause at all. Cause it
No,
was
not at all.
it was, oh man, when was that? That was probably like the mid to early 90s, and we all kind of grew up through the 80s, so we were not dice people back then at all. the, it was a dark period of history.
Pogs and gaming and evil.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh God, Pogs. You said Pogs.
Right. Because when you think of early 90s, I would definitely remember like having Pog sets and like trying to find like the cool metal ones. And I don't know, there was a bunch there.
No,
They were
no.
they were totally useless toys, but somehow they were addictive.
Well, there's a lot of toys like that. I mean, yo-yos and like really simple toys, slinkies, silly putty, but they're like classics.
But anyway, about endings, I was going to ask you. This is a thing that I do, even if a game of mine goes bad, or there's a game of mine that is just going to end, and like we're not going to pick it back up. I will do a thing where I will sit down and I will write a character epilogue for a full story based off where we left off for every single character, and then a world epilogue of what happens. And I will give those to all my players to close out the game. It doesn't matter if my game made it 2 game sessions in or if I was running it for a year. I will always, as a storyteller, take the time to give at least some closure to the campaign. Ever done anything like that, or is that something that you guys do?
You're a much more dedicated GM than me. You know what? I did. I want to say we kind of did that when we ended our level 20 game. Ted did that with the characters a little bit, but it was more like the players kind of did like their thing at the end. What are you going to do? And I definitely did that when I GM'd at D&D in a castle, like where it was kind of collaborative of like, hey, what would your character do now that this adventure is over? And and I would like fill in some blanks here and there, but then again, that was like a $30,000 D&D table. So it's high stakes D&D.
Yeah,
So,
I wanted to go to D&D in a castle, and I wanted to go GM at D&D in a castle. So I'm gonna try to make a point next year to be like, hey, I am a storyteller. I would love to go GM there. Let me come do that.
Yeah, I won't tell you why I know you should do this right now, but you should start that now.
Okay, I will. I just got to figure out who to reach out to other than Satine and be like, because I can ask her, but I got to find the right person at the right time to be like, hey.
Do you know? We'll talk when we're done.
All right.
So Brian, are there any writing techniques from older editions of D&D that you feel still have a place in the modern edition? Box text, elaborate room descriptions, etc.
So from the older manuals, I always I'll grab text. Written text never goes out of date. If you even have like an old school like, I don't know, like these crazy like old Ensign magazines, right? And you find some of the monster descriptions from there. Sometimes just that descriptive text can help you go. I think Curse of Strahd and any like Ravenloft or Dark Sun is a lot of fun right now to pull back and surprise current players if you have a group of 5e fanatics. Going to Spelljammer is a great campaign setting that has a lot of surprisingly good material in it that can really change the tone of a campaign and surprise people again. Eberron, I was going to say, but they've already brought that back in. For the most part, I do tend to say, I'll be honest, I totally come up with my own flavor text and stuff like that for adventures, but I will grab old modules and old encounters from other game systems. So I will grab Shadowrun content, I will grab White Wolf content, I will grab Legend of the Five Rings content a fair bit, and Seven Seas, and I will just throw them into D&D. I just rip out the mechanics. So I am notoriously criminal in grabbing other game lines and porting over ideas and stories from them and some of that flavor text, because it's really well written in some of these other game settings, and all you have to be able to do is throw out the rules.
Do you have a favorite place to cherry pick from?
Wraith the Oblivion.
What is it about that
So
game
so
system that you like the starters?
Wraith the Oblivion is the kind of game where you sit there and you play it with 3 players by candlelight, and one person is the protagonist, the next person is the shadow who's trying to like guide that person to destruction, and then the third person is, you know, sort of the grounded, like the living person in the world, right? And you can have this very intricate haunted love story, or you could have these, you know, terrifying stories. And I run a lot of either political or conspiracy or horror games, and the flavor text and the stories of Wraith the Oblivion are heart-wrenching. You know, there is a story in one of the books about this ghost floating in the sea before he drowns to oblivion, and he's talking to a shadow who's holding on to the other raft, and they're looking at each other, and the wraith starts off at the beginning of the story blaming the shadow, and the shadow eventually at the end of it looks at him and goes, "What are you talking about? I've done everything we've done because I love you, and I'm tired of seeing you in pain." And it's at that point that they both drown. And like that kind of stuff really resonates with me. And so, you know, I will use a lot of Wraith the Oblivion because there's rules, but they don't freaking matter in the Shadowlands. So if you notice, even when I was talking about the God of Death, I mentioned Purgatory. I mentioned this. I mean, my own book series, I write using the Underworld and like the Lands of the Dead. And I tend to go very heavily into the afterlife and what happens and the cosmology behind that. So because of that, Wraith the Oblivion is the game system I absolutely draw from iconically. Because I mean, like the legends of Persephone, you know, Karen, all of that stuff about, you know, Hades. There's so much myth, and in every culture around the world, there is legends of the afterlife and their death. And so there's even so much real life theology to just dive into that can enrich a game setting no matter what you are playing.
You know, something like similar came up in our session we ran this weekend, where we kind of did like a flashback, and I took elements from their session 0, where, you know, we're playing in a setting that's very reptile centric. So all the like main races are reptiles, and more sophisticated. The humans in that setting are more primitive and referred to as hairless apes. So one of them wanted to play a human, and they decided to connect themselves to one of the other players. And so I was like, well, how's that connection going to work? You're raised by this other race in this noble house, and you know the one player's like, well, you know, they adopted a human child, and I was like, well, how did you get that human? And then it turns out it wasn't actually adopted. The one player stole the baby, right? And so I was like, okay. So we did a flashback scene of that, and then what happens afterwards, of like the mother and father are grieving because they've lost a child, and you know it's just gone, and the mother ends up like taking her life because of that. And the player's like, oh, I didn't like that. And I'm like, what do you think would happen when you steal someone's baby? You know, so it's like and then like we had some foreshadowing on what's going to happen next, but you know, more things will come up from that. And I like when you take the player's stuff and like twist the knife a little bit.
I mean, you know, your story has to have that, right? Otherwise, it gets, you know, it's kind of milk toast, right?
Yeah.
But if you're also looking to grab inherent, just one-shot ideas for running a campaign off the fly, the Shadowrun books with their like Johnson missions, where a Johnson sits down and asks you to go do this heist or raid this company. It doesn't matter what game you're running. The Johnson missions are always hilarious. Listen, I have a competitor. He's got a real big thing for pineapples. I want to make him hate pineapples. Your mission for the next month is to deliver him pineapples at home, at his work, everywhere he goes. He's a high secure client, so you're going to have to break in. But all I want you to do is never hurt him. Just deliver him pineapples in every variety you can think of. that's your mission, right? That sounds kind of odd and weird, but it's hilarious to actually run that.
Yeah.
And you could run that in D&D. Imagine like a high wizard in a tower in, freaking the land of purple dragon knights, and your mission as a group of adventurers is to always keep delivering him pineapples to the point where he is sick of pineapples and having to throw them around at people. And he's trying to figure out who's doing it or who's behind this conspiracy. And the pineapple conspiracy was the title of this adventure, and I thought it was freaking hilarious. And it works, though, even though it is this off the wall, outside of the system box, it's still easy to port over, and add humor to it.
Have you ported that particular one over?
I have run the pineapple conspiracy. That was one that I've run, which is why I kind of know eventually, how frustrated that wizard got.
Nice. In the recent months, I've seen a debate on Twitter about getting rid of box text, if it's still like relevant or not. How do you feel about box text?
I think that, okay, so first off, I think room descriptions that are narrative are solid, because storytellers sometimes can rely upon them as a crutch, and sometimes need them at a table, even to give the storyteller a reason to understand what they're going to describe. Not that you're going to read it out loud verbatim, but it's like reading a book, right? You need to be able to be brought into the scene and be able to be brought into the setting, and you yourself have to be immersed in the content. And so I would prefer content be written in such a way that it speaks to you as a storyteller, like, here's the setting and here's the scene. But if you just come to me with, it's an 8.5 by 11 room that is 30 squares wide, there's 3 goblins over here in a corner, and there's the loot of 5 gems over here, that is useless to me. That great, whatever, boring, toss that out. So I find that even like sometimes offering like dialogue to people of like, this is what this NPC would say, here's the different options, it can be something that can be helpful. I think that's because I've been, I'm a novelist, and so I kind of want to write those immersive elements into a story, but I will never fall into anything that is going to be useful to me that is like, hey, here's this room, it's a 60 by 60 grid map with these traps here. I will leave that to the storyteller and say, there is this haunted library, you can smell the incense, and you can taste the rotting old books in this room. Here is an encounter that may happen, and let the storyteller do with what they will on that. So I guess that doesn't really answer the question.
Oh no, you've frozen. You're now a JPEG. I like to ask that occasionally for people that do a lot of writing, just because my friend James Intercasso, I believe he's one of the ones that started that debate on Twitter. But one of the best things that I've seen or heard was from another guest who basically said that they use the flavor text to let the game master know what was important to them, what was the relevant information for them for creating creating that scene and imparting that to the players, instead of having a bunch of bullet points that may or may not be useful to a particular GM, especially maybe a newer GM. So maybe they put out things that aren't really relevant to the players or what's going on. And it looks like Rick has just dropped off, and we're getting close to the end. We'll see what happens if he pops back in or not. But unfortunately, so I find it interesting to ask that question and see what other people think and how they feel about it. I mean, as someone who doesn't run a lot of pre-written adventures, I don't have as much input. I will run off of a couple sentences. There was a time when I would write my material as if I was writing an adventure from start to finish, and write my own flavor text.
It came back.
You are back. So That's all right. I just consider continue the conversation about box text and flavor text without you. uh, you know, the internet being what it is, these things happen.
Yep.
We I think it was last Friday. I ended up having to cancel because a dump truck took out some lines down the road, and we had no internet or power, I should say.
We had no power for 3 days last week.
Ugh, yuck. Oh yeah, I keep hearing news stories about that, but we haven't experienced it, thankfully. What a lovely time to be without power too.
Yeah, right. When you're stuck at home, no internet, no life.
And in the middle of the summer.
Yes.
Yeah, so bummer.
That actually reminds me, because like I'm tossing out food and stuff like that. Do you ever use the one thing I miss about being behind COVID, the thing that I really wish that I could go into playing in person for, is I tend to do dinners based off of the type of game session that we're running, and they're usually themed, right? Like, so if we're playing Shadowrun, I'll order like takeout and instant noodles for everybody and stuff like that.
Okay.
If we're playing D&D, we'll usually make some like fare based on whatever city that we're in. I tend to find a lot of like food-based tie-ins for gaming, and I really miss that.
We don't. We usually just order pizza. I want to play in your games. We're lame.
You can't do it every time, but especially if you're going to have a really cool big session, especially your opening ones. I always do. We always bring food and cuisine and desserts and beverages that are thematic to that area.
It wouldn't work too good in our group because of Ted. Ted ruins everything. He's super picky eater with a limited palate. So.
Oh, we have one of those. We make him bring his own food.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's funny too. Even in my household, like I am the most adventurous when it comes to food, and will generally eat the most. And I'm married to Ted's sister, so I mean she's not nearly as bad as Ted. But when I'm around any of them and they start asking me about what to eat, I just intentionally say things I know they won't eat, because I'm like, I eat anything. It doesn't really matter. Why don't you guys pick, and we'll work it out from there.
Mm.
But yeah.
But yeah, no, food is a fun part of gaming for me. And
so do you cook everything, or you order, or do you do like a potluck?
So I will potluck it usually. I have recently, maybe the past 2 years, started to become more adventurous with trying to learn how to cook and do different things. And I mean, heck, even when I was writing the Shadelands, we had this whole idea of like, let's look at how does a culture that has magic grow food in their areas, and what do you do with this? So I have like a whole chapter on like cuisine in the Shadelands, but I have gotten more into cooking since I've been at home, and so I've started playing around with recipes and trying to find stuff and look up more beverages. And I used to be a bartender when I was younger, so I've always made it all started because I would make cocktails based off of different character classes, all the and you can find them online. There are tons of recipes that bartenders have put up, like the Bard's cocktail and things like that, or Fireball. And so I started off that I would make cocktails based off things, and now it's because I've been learning how to cook more and more, I am now more interested in going further. And so it started off as potluck, or we would order out, and now it's like we're going to order out some things, and then I will make this one dish. And that's kind of where we were at, where I had finally made a full meal from scratch. And
so depending on how good of a cook you are, your players may or may not take real poison damage.
Right. And I did at one point have to be like, all right, listen guys, I will supply the food, but I'm running the game, and now I'm cooking for you, and I'm hosting. So you all better bring the goddamn alcohol.
Yeah. So there's this themed pub called the Cauldron. There's one in New York City, and there's like 6 or 7 more of them around the world. And like they do all kinds of like crazy mixed drinks that are kind of themed. It's fantasy themed. And they also, like, in the center of the bar, there is this giant tree with taps coming out of it, and I don't know if you rent or purchase these wands, and they activate the taps, and you kind of like pour your own beverages, but then they also do like mixology classes and stuff like that.
So Milwaukee has some really great restaurants that do this as well, and there's one of them called Oakenshield, and their restaurant is freaking fantastic. And if you're ever in Milwaukee, go to Oakenshield because they have the same thing, like these crazy awesome beverages and food that are incredibly themed, and it was really really freaking tasty. So I want more of them. I want to be able to go play at a place like that.
Yeah, I think there's a gaming tavern in Canada that Brian has supplied. They have the largest collection of Brian's work put up around it. Is a gaming tavern like that, and there's definitely a few. Although I do find like the ambience for places like that aren't always conducive to gaming.
It's like running in a game shop or at a con. I mean,
yeah. Well, so we have there's a organization called Drinks and Dragons, and they do that. They host games at different bars, different nights of the week. And I been to that, and that wasn't too bad because they're able to section off a part of the bar. So it's like there's like 5 or 6 D&D tables going. So it seems and it's during the week, so things are slower at the bar anyway. So you're able to get food and drink and play some D&D.
yeah, and I mean, if you've had to run a table at Gen Con or if you've been around the con environment, those are never conducive to actual gaming. No. You know, there's way too much noise in those rooms. Your party members sit on down. You have barely have any time to introduce them to what's going on, and you still have to have that hook. So, and then you have to keep elevating your voice higher and higher and higher because everybody else at the tables near you, nobody can hear each other. So,
GamehoCon did a pretty good job with that, and cons are getting better at it too. Where they're, I mean, it's not perfect, but they're using like draping and stuff like that to try and at least deaden some of the sound, so it's just not like sheer noise.
Yeah, well, running in a game store as well never seems to work because they have bad acoustics.
Yeah.
And especially if somebody else is running a Magic tournament, you know, right there next to where your table's going, it runs out. But that's why I think I started using props and things that people could touch, because I realized I couldn't set music, I couldn't have the same visuals, and so I started putting things like the Jenga towers on the table in the middle of the game, and like finding different ways to immerse people rather than just rolling dice, because you can't.
Distracting.
Yeah, you can't do the standard. Hey, let me put on some awesome music. Let me pull up, on my TV a screen of character arts for you guys, and like here's this food. Like it's very different to run in a con or a store environment, and I imagine a bar would be the same way.
Yeah, for sure. So we're past the hour mark, so it's time to wrap things up. Any final thoughts before we head out?
No, I know that I guess my final thoughts are thank you so much for having me, actually. And yes, if you're listening and you like warlocks and you like metal, please help us.
Yeah. No, it sounds great. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I would take it as a personal favor if you poke me when your next book comes out so I can check it out, because I will forget.
It is Seventh Age Dystopia. It is all written. It is done through Dev Edits. I got a publisher. So it's I'm pleased to announce that on my end, I'm actually done.
Yeah. Will that one be on Audible as well?
I hope so. I'm not sure what the plan is to get it there. I think I don't know about that one, so I can't answer that one.
Yeah, I think I listened to the last one. I didn't read it. I listened to it on Audible. And
yeah, I think worst case scenario, I am gonna do the narration myself if I need to just get it there, right? I'm like, okay, fine, I'll just do it myself.
Who did the narration on the first one?
James Patrick Cronin. He was actually in like Freakazoid in the 90s cartoon show. It was James.
It was good. So
yeah,
I enjoyed it. With that, as always, all the links are in in the description. They'll be in the pinned post once this is not live anymore. Thanks for stopping by, and until next time, stay nerdy.